Soil tests tell us a lot of information and tell us more than what they want us to know, but also withhold a pile of information. Now, I think Cindy put out a message. If you have a soil test, I can go through some numbers and tell you what we look at. And what I mean by that is when we look at something, we want to look for the easiest, quickest, cheapest fix that costs the least amount of money, that makes us the biggest return and makes our life easier. So on every soil test, there's a pH. If your pH is over 7, you've got a problem. And it's a bigger problem than what most guys will tell you you have. If your pH is over 7, the phosphorus that you have in the soil is almost completely unavailable. Phosphorus is a very sensitive mineral. It's dad that's in charge of his feminine side. And this phosphorus, dad says, oh, if the pH is over 7, I'm not moving. If the pH is under 6, I'm not moving. So the fertilizer guy says, well, we'll just sell you a little more phosphorus. They will eventually get tied up in the wrong pH, so we get to sell you more. And then they'll put a little bit more on next year, and then the next year they'll put a little bit more on, and pretty soon a lot of people become what they do, more on, more on, more on. Let's not do that. I was guilty of that. pH stands for potential hydrogen. What the hell does that mean? The higher the pH of your soil, the higher the potential your soil has of hanging on to hydrogen. Oh, great. What does that mean? I tell a lot of guys, I said, if pH stood for potential hair, I would have a great number. The physicists look at pH differently than the chemists do. The chemists will say, well, if you're close to a 7 pH, you're a little more alkaline. Okay, what's that mean? Or they say if you're a little under 6, you're a little more acidic. Yeah, big deal. The physicists say as the pH goes up, the resistance in your soil goes up. Resistance, is there any way we can measure resistance in the soil? If your pH is over 7, you have resistance. Too much resistance. If your pH is under 6, you don't have enough resistance. Now, looking at your soil test, if your pH is over 7, and if they gave you a base saturation, speaking of base saturation, I'm going to back up for a second. There's a lot of people, a lot of farmers that are Albrecht fans that say, by golly, Dr. Albrecht had it figured out. 68% calcium base saturation, 12 to 15 base saturation of magnesium. That just works. And those people are right. There's other people who will say, Albrecht was a ding-dong. Reams, Dr. Kerry Reams, he had it figured out. And he looked at energy. He looked at Milhouse units. He looked at the physics side of this. Now, I don't know if this story is true, but I've heard it from 2 very reliable sources that are no longer with us. But they said Albrecht and Reams knew each other. They spoke. They consulted with each other. And here's the cool part. They both sat down with a fella by the name of Einstein. And as the story goes that I heard, when Albrecht and Reams were sitting in front of Einstein, Einstein would say, "Well, Albrecht, you understand chemistry. This is good. You have an understanding. Wonderful. Reams, you understand medicine and you understand physics. This is good. If you both work together, you will create biology, and that is great." Don't know if this is true, but Dr. Scow, Dr. Dan Scow told me that, and also Steve Weston, both students of Kerry Reams. So if you're a Reams follower, awesome. There's great information there. If you're an Albrecht follower, awesome. There's great information there. Every one of these people can teach us things. So, looking at pH, if you have a soil test and your pH is over 7, I can guarantee you that you'll be short of carbon. Why? Because if your pH of your soil is over 7, you have no hydrogen on the base saturation of your soil test. Well, who talks about hydrogen at a soil meeting? Goofy bald guy from South Dakota doesn't know what he's talking about. What makes up 4% of the dry matter weight of a plant? Hydrogen. What if you don't have any in the pantry? The plant can't make sugar, and the industry is counting on that. Take away one insignificant ingredient, hydrogen, and the plant is stuck. It's like, I want to make sugar, but I can't. So all of a sudden, if you check your carbon to nitrogen on the soil test, and you have to ask for that, you have to ask and pay extra for this carbon and nitrogen. So if you have a pH of 7.2 and you have a carbon to nitrogen of 12 to 1, you're not in the game. I don't mean to be anything but honest, but you got to have your carbon to 16, and you got to get that pH below 7. How do you lower the pH in soil? Anybody tell you that sulfuric acid, gypsum, Tiger 90, dump large amounts of sulfur, sulfate, sulfuric acid? That will work a little bit for a very short period of time, and it's going to be expensive. There's one element that stabilizes up to 9 times its weight in hydrogen. That one thing makes up the majority of the dry matter weight of your plant. Carbon. Add carbon to your soil, your pH will come down. Make sure you have air, and make sure the carbon's there. This all came about a few years ago. Cindy calls me and says, "How do we know if we have a deficiency in hydrogen?" And I'm on the phone, it's just like, this is why I'm bald, by the way. It's like, oh my God. And I say, so then I'm buying time. It's like, can you say that again? Very politely, she goes, why and how can we tell if we have a deficiency in hydrogen? I'm still buying time, so I repeat it. It's like, you're looking to tell about a hydrogen deficiency. I say, I got nothing. Well, she infected my brain, the 3 cells that are left, and we had a soil lab for many, many years, and I started digging through hundreds and thousands of soil tests and started looking, and I started noticing any soil test that had a pH over 7 had 0 hydrogen. Any soil test that was under 6 had all kinds of hydrogen. What gives? Hydrogen is one of the lightest, squirreliest molecules in the soil. If you have a pH under 6, you need calcium. Now, there's a catch. There's always a catch. If you have a pH that's way under 6, please look at your aluminum or aluminium. The aluminum is a problem. Now, if anybody was at our last year's conference, my free thinking many times isn't a benefit to my well-being, but aluminum is a big tough guy in the soil. And aluminum is what makes up the clay colloid that Dr. Albrecht talked about. And let's just say my hand is a clay particle. Let's even do better yet. This book is a clay particle. And Dr. Albrecht would say there's 100 parking spots around this clay colloid. This clay colloid is made up of aluminum silicate. Of these 100 parking spots, Dr. Albrecht said 68 to 70 parking spots should be calcium. 12 to 15 parking spots should be magnesium. Blah, 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 so on and so forth. Dr. Albrecht called this the base saturation, the foundation, the beginning, the footing, not the ultimate pinnacle of saturation, the base saturation. And too many growers and too many speakers are saying, if you achieve base saturation, you have arrived. You've arrived in a place that you're not going to want to be because you've still got primitive soil. The base saturation is accurate. 68% calcium, absolutely. 12 to 15% base saturation magnesium, absolutely. But if you see that you've got 500, 600, 800, 900 parts per million of aluminum, nothing is going to bring that pH up in that soil but aluminum's girlfriend that he lost. And aluminum's girlfriend, her name is silica. And the soil got so depleted, the plant pulled the silica off of the aluminum, and now aluminum's pissed. He's like, I want my girlfriend back, and I'm going to cause ruckus until I get her. I'm going to tear stuff up. I'm not going to grow anything. Microbes are going to die from overexposure, and I don't care because I want silica back. If you don't get a good silica on that high aluminum, he's going to cause ruckus forever. Nothing else fixes that soil as quick, as cheap, as good, honest, monosalicylic acid, silica. We've learned a lot from Greg and Cindy and both crews about what silica does if you have high aluminum. And if I may ask, how many guys, and you may not have high aluminum, anybody have a neighbor that possibly has high aluminum, low pH soils? Okay. Anybody have a neighbor that has did I say low pH, high aluminum? Was that the first one? Yeah. Okay, how about low aluminum, but high pH, soil pH, heavy clay? Okay. The base saturation works for both of them. If you don't have your pH fixed, nothing's going to work right. I'm going to say that again in a different way. If your pH is above 7 or below 6, it needs to be a priority to get that in check. If you don't have high aluminum, but your pH is low, you need to put a little calcium out there. Look at your soil test. You want to eventually get to 68 or 70% base saturation of calcium. If you have sand, and looking at your soil test, and you have single digits of magnesium, please put out some dolomite. Dolomite is a calcium-magnesium combination, and please don't put out the volume that most companies will tell you. They will say, oh, golly, look at your numbers here. You're going to need 2 ton or 3 ton or 3.5 ton. Your soil can't digest 3.5 ton of anything. Nobody's can. What we have found is if you have sandy soil, take some good electrically available calcium, put a pile of sugar with it, put some soft rock, put all the goodies in it, create some carbon, spray that down to get the microbes going, to get them moving, because what's going to happen is that liquid sugar is the liquid portion of carbon that allows the microbes to create the gas, the CO2. Now they're awake, they're alive, they're partying, doing, how's the Trump dance go? Anybody ever see that? I'm a horrible dancer, but they're getting the party going, and now you can start introducing solids. Solids in the form of a dry spread dolomite or a high cal lime. Start with a good available calcium, sugar, and some goodies. Your representative can put together a mix. And then rather than putting 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of a high cal lime, a pella lime, or a dolomite, do 300 pounds. It's going to take more spreading, but you're going to get more availability, you're going to get more efficiency, and you're not only going to get it to the soil, but you're going to get it from the soil to the plant. So all these numbers that you see on your soil test are great. Every one of those elements, minerals on your soil test, has to be hooked to oxygen to go from the soil to the plant. Dr. Dykstra is probably one of the leading experts on soil and sap testing of plants. He has seen what goes on. Please keep in mind. Do you have a question? Okay. I'm watching you, pal. Every element has to be hooked to oxygen. Total P, P1, P2 has to become P2O5. Potassium has to become potassium oxide. Magnesium has to become magnesium oxide. Now, looking at calcium and phosphorus, the mom and the dad, they're the sugar builders. They're the parents of the soil. Those are the parents, and the 3 oldest kids in the family are potassium, magnesium, and sulfur. They call themselves the electrolyte brothers. They electrically tie things up. Magnesium, let me back up. Potassium is the electrolyte mineral that Gatorade uses, the power drinks, the rehydrators. Potassium hangs on to water. So if I were potassium, I'd say, oh, you guys don't need this water. I'll be taking this, and I'll put it somewhere. And I start grabbing everybody's water. You know this is happening because you're going to see weeds growing. Guess what mineral weeds like? Potassium. How do we know this? Because we've checked the sugar content. When you have an excess of potassium, that potassium hangs onto water. The water dilutes the sugar content of the plant, and you get a watery, washy plant that has low Brix, high disease, low yield, and too many input costs. Earlier today, we talked about the plant wanting carbon and oxygen. It makes up 90% of the plant. Any problem you have in the soil or in the plant, I'll bet you a new pair of boots you have a carbon and or oxygen deficiency. And I'll be right over 90% of the time because it makes up 90% of the plant. What a smart guy. When a plant is looking for carbon and oxygen and can't find it, it will take nitrogen as a horribly crappy substitute. A different example. If I was up here and say, you know what? You guys have been the most fun of any group I've talked to in the last 3 years. I would love to buy each and every one of you a steak dinner. You think, you know what? This guy is coming up in the ranks. We may actually like him after another day or so. Truck everybody out to a restaurant. And I say, well, do you guys like porterhouse? Do you like a ribeye? Anybody like a filet? What about a New York strip? And it's like, oh, everybody loves a steak. So the menus come out and the waiter comes out and everybody orders. And, well, how would you like it done? Well, I'd like a medium. And it's like, oh boy. The waiters come back with everybody's order and everybody's got hot dogs. What a horrible, horrible trick that is. It may be beef, tube steak in some parts of the world. That's what happens to a plant when it's waiting and wanting carbon and oxygen. That's its steak dinner. And then here comes the nitrogen. It's like, oh, crap, that is not what I want. Now I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get a fungus. I'm probably going to have a mold. I'm going to have weeds growing up. I'm going to have insects chewing on me, all because I didn't get my carbon and oxygen. Please focus on what the plant is made of. When I was in Nebraska with the chemical no-till GMO farmers, I said, if you don't know what a plant is made of, how do you know what to feed for? And I got this look and it got quiet and like, these guys were like, holy crap. For not too smart a looking guy, he actually made a pretty good point there. Once you understand what the plant is made of, now we got a fighting chance. Carbon and oxygen. When in doubt, think about carbon and oxygen. If you have a problem, you've got carbon and oxygen deficiency. If you want better yield, better test weight, increase your carbon and oxygen. When you're done looking at your carbon and oxygen, swing back around and then take a look at your carbon and oxygen. Your nitrogen bill will go down. There's something else that a plant wants. A plant loves to have calcium in its system, just like we do, for our bone structure, for our heartbeat, for our teeth, for all the structural integrity that we need. A plant needs that. And you know how much a good, healthy plant needs to have for calcium. Because I hope that you wrote it down this morning. 2% calcium. This is why we have this sheet. This is a guide that's more important than you may realize right now. When you get 2% calcium and 0.3% phosphorus, it doesn't matter what your soil test says. When I was in Nebraska, one of the chemical guys, he says, well, what parts per million do you like to see a soil test of calcium be? That's a great question, but I'm going to come around a different way. Doesn't matter what's there, what do you get into the plant? So we go to a different restaurant after you have these wonderful tube steaks, and it's like, I'm going to treat you guys to something else. I'm just full of give. And everybody gets a can of soup, but nobody has any sharp objects or a can opener. What good's a can of soup if you can't open the son of a gun up? That's just dirty. Make sure the mineral is getting to where it needs to be. Please don't stop looking when you see the soil test. The soil test is wonderful. The soil test gives you a number. It doesn't tell you it's available. Please look at the tissue test. Please look at a sap test. Please look at a chemistry wet lab test to make sure it's getting to the plant. Potassium is the #1 electrolyte mineral. It's the big brother of the electrolytes. It hangs on to water. When a plant is looking for calcium and can't find it, Calcium and potassium are side by side on the periodic table. They weigh almost the same. And if a plant can't find calcium, it's kind of like the carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen thing. If a plant can't find calcium, it says, fine, give me some potassium. If you have a perennial crop and your potassium level is higher than your calcium, you're not making sugar. You don't have good feed. What you're feeding, and I mean no disrespect here, but what you're feeding is eventually and only keeping that animal's ribs apart and eventually making a turd. These are all technical terms. When your calcium in your perennial crop, and this is also for pasture, if you want to look at grazing or carrying capacity or finishing cattle on grass, all of these rules apply. Animals eat on a nutritional basis, giving no regard to quantity. What's that mean? The lower the sugar, the lower the energy, the lower the carbon and oxygen of the feed, the more she has to eat to do what you want her to do. To carry a calf, to feed a calf, to fill a milk quota, whatever it may be. A lot of the regenerative people are saying, mob graze, grow that grass up, run the cattle out, grub it to the dirt, and move on. You've now destroyed part of your root system. The root is the anchor, the basis, the essence of that plant. And every time you take more than a third of the top growth off that, you deteriorate the roots. Now, if you've got a 10-inch aerobic zone and you got a mop head of roots, you can pop that bad boy for a long time and get by with it. If you've got a 2-inch aerobic zone and a little scrubby, skinny, dark-colored roots, there's going to be hell coming quick. Taking more than a third of the total growth off will deter and diminish the roots of your plant. To give you another version of this, you're mowing the grass on your yard, on your lawn, and you mow a little bit off every time. And then you kind of look in the trees a little bit. There's grass that tall. It's like, ah, shoot, I'll just swing in there and cut it. You cut a foot of that down to nothing. How quick does that regrow? It takes a long time. But where you just took a little bit of that grass off, it comes right back. It has to have some solar collectors to grab some sunshine. If you're growing a cover crop, and if you graze that cover crop, it is no longer a cover crop. I was in Georgia, and one of the speakers had this beautiful cover crop, belly deep grass on these cows, and these cows are eating it. He says, look at that cover crop that my cows are grazing on. I said, in South Dakota, we don't call that a cover crop, that's pasture. And if you graze it off, don't expect it to produce miracles for the soil, because you already gave that soil and those plants a job to make milk or to make meat. The higher the sugar content of that grass, the less they will eat, the higher the carrying capacity of that acre or that hectare will be, and the more efficient that grass is. If you want a grass-finished beef without corn, get the sugar content up. Thank you. Yeah, amen. And the choir sings. What do I mean by getting it up, getting the sugar up? If you're not over 10 Brix, you don't have any bragging rights. You will fight and work and tear the hide off to get up to 10 Brix. You earn the right of double digits. But once you get there, you'll say, This is why I fought and clawed to do this. It may take a year. It may take 3 or 4. What's your budget? What's your time frame? And how dedicated are you to the program? As we go through the soil test, if your potassium is overly high on the soil test, don't necessarily get wigged out and lose your mind. Because if you have enough available calcium, the microbes in the plant will take what it needs. A good grass sample, a good perennial alfalfa sample, you should have a minimum 2% calcium, 0.3% phosphorus, and be less than 2% potassium. That feed will make milk. That feed will help with butterfat, with protein, and it'll also help starting dropping your somatic cell count. It'll also help with hoof problems. If you have, how many cow guys do we have here? Dairy? Okay, hoof trimmers. In the U.S., hoof trimmers are getting a lot more of a relationship with the dairy farmers than what the dairy farmers would like. If you want to get rid of some of your hoof trimmer bills, reduce the nitrogen in your crop. Nitrogen grows a fast, watery, unhealthy plant. Too much nitrogen in the feed grows fast toenails, hooves. Increase the carbon and oxygen, decrease the nitrogen, and you'll decrease your hoof trimming bill. Potassium. On your soil test, it's the first electrolyte mineral. It's the only mineral that got a nickname. What do I mean by that? Calcium isn't called sweetie pie. Phosphorus isn't Bubba. But potassium got nicknamed potash. Why? Why would they nickname one mineral out of all of them? Potassium is the one mineral, when exposed to sunlight, when exposed to fire, when exposed to heat, when exposed to infrared and ultraviolet, it's the only mineral that won't oxidize and go up into the atmosphere. What they don't tell you about no-till is as you leave that residue on top of the soil, everything oxidizes and leaves you except for one mineral, potash. Guess what excess potash grows? Weeds. Yeah, weeds don't like calcium. Weeds don't like phosphorus. Those both oxidize in the sunlight. If you have a wood-burning stove, you burn corn or coal or grass or wood, and everything gets oxidized, everything gets burned, everything becomes heat and goes up the chimney. What do you have left? Ash. Pot ash. When you throw that out in a certain area of your yard, what grows there really well? Weeds. Weeds aren't just a plant growing out of place. The weeds are saying, hey, since you're going to throw all this potash here, we're going to grow because we like it. If you're a no-till farmer, and we get so many calls and so many emails from the no-till farmers that are getting paid by the government to do a no-till program, and they're saying this isn't working. We get good yields, but the dollars that it's costing aren't worth it. Our weed pressure is higher. Our disease pressure is higher. Our insect damage is higher. We get a lot of bushels, but we're not making any money. For whatever reason, Indiana is the state that we get probably 3 to 5 to 7 phone calls and emails a day on these guys that got into the program. They're getting paid by the government to do no-till. They're saying it's not working. The potassium is getting in excess. The weeds are growing in the environment that they've created because the calcium, mama, she's a big old girl that's migrated down through that no-till environment. Potassium keeps getting deposited on top, and here come the weeds. If mom isn't in the top portion of the house, i.e. the soil, ruckus happens. Calcium and phosphorus have to be in every part of the soil to feed the microbes, to feed the plant, to keep the system going. None of us are too old to remember when we were kids, mom and dad left us home at some point in time. And if your family was anything like mine, something got broke, somebody bled, and things went on that never would have happened if mom or dad were there. And if you're anything like us, we tried to get the blood stopped, and we tried to fix anything before they got back because we knew that if mom and dad came back and there's somebody still bleeding, there would be more hell to pay. I'm seeing more smiles and giggles. Thanks for being honest. The calcium and the phosphorus have to be in the soil. If you apply calcium, any kind of calcium, please never, ever, ever work it in. Calcium has a natural migration. It'll move down on its own. Don't work it down because the only way it's going to come back up is with tillage or in a weed. Whoa. A weed brings calcium up to the top of the soil? A weed isn't growing anywhere other than where it's supposed to. If you look at a dandelion, a musk thistle, a Canada thistle, the bigger, the whiter, and the heavier that root is. It didn't get that way until it found calcium. It may have been at 3 inches, it may have been at 5 inches, it may have been at 7 inches. We did tests in our greenhouse where we planted dandelions in this little, and right by a plexiglass end on our raised beds. And this little thread root would go down, just a skinny little scrubby root. And we had calcium down 7 inches down. And I'm sure it's coincidence, but once it hit the calcium, it stopped. And that skinny little discolored root all of a sudden started getting big and strong and white and thick. And that weed's job is to pull that calcium back up on top, and when that weed dies, it deposits that calcium back on top. There must have been a plan in the 6 days when things got put together. So, when a plant wants carbon and oxygen, please don't give it nitrogen. When a plant wants calcium, please don't give it potassium. It doesn't necessarily mean anything on what your soil test shows you. Check the air with the penetrometer. If you don't have air in the soil, your minerals will not be available. Ever, ever, ever. If you don't have air in the soil, the microbes can't give off carbon dioxide, CO2. Now, since everybody had a good lunch, we're gonna throw a little chemistry out here. This is a tough question. CO2, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen, is carbon dioxide, di being 2. What happens if we take 1 molecule of oxygen away from carbon dioxide? Let's say the soil tightens up or crusts over and everything in the soil is grabbing oxygen. Carbon dioxide will become carbon, and the choir sings, carbon monoxide. Anybody have a carbon monoxide shake for breakfast? We've tested carbon monoxide in the soil. Oh, but there's more. If you're looking at your soil test, and your salesman says, you need more nitrogen, because that's just what you do. Done it for 30 years and it's worked forever. If you have carbon in the soil with no oxygen, an anaerobic airless environment, carbon, and you throw nitrogen at it, you now have the ability to form cyanide. Yay. And these guys in California with dirty, rotten, hard, nasty soil, so they just can't figure out why my trees don't look very good. Got a couple ideas. Carbon monoxide or cyanide usually isn't on the get fit list of being healthy. Make sure the soil can breathe. The minerals on your soil test, the calcium, 68%. Magnesium, 12 to 15%. Magnesium is the second electrolyte mineral. Magnesium, if you're over 15% on your base saturation, you're going to find out that your nitrogen keeps getting tied up. Some parts of your field, you get this light green. It's like, put down the same amount of nitrogen over the whole field, and this field looks deficient. Crop consultant comes out, says, I need some nitrogen there. When magnesium is in excess, it will tie up nitrogen on a 1-to-1 basis. Magnesium electrically loves nitrogen. What's a mineral that tames down magnesium? Mom. Calcium. If she's there, if she's available. If my parents would have nicknamed us after minerals, my brother would have been Magnesium, because he just couldn't control himself. He was the kid that had to sit in between mom and dad in church because he just couldn't hold it together. If magnesium is a problem and you see high nitrate or nitrogen numbers on your soil test, a good available calcium topically applied will go down with the water, and the calcium, mom, will go magnesium. Come here, let go of that nitrogen. If your carbon to nitrogen ratio isn't where you want it, 8-to-1, 9-to-1, 10-to-1 low, you can improve the carbon to nitrogen ratio not just by increasing the carbon, but by decreasing the nitrogen that's tied up, that's not being a benefit. And to give you some real numbers, we've had some soil that they had 18, 19, 20% magnesium, and you put down a good calcium and some sugar to feed the microbes, the nitrogen gets pulled off and goes to the plant. All of a sudden, what was an 8-to-1 carbon to nitrogen is now a 12-to-1 or a 13-to-1. And the farmer's like, well, there's nothing to this deal. It's like, well, hang on, cowboy. We can only do this a couple times. You're going to have to add something. But knowing what you have, treating the soil for what it is, the magnesium will electrically tie up nitrogen. Now, if you don't have enough magnesium, single digits, 6, 7, 8% on sand, you're going to see things on the plant that most guys won't be able to be honest with you. On alfalfa, on low magnesium, you're going to see the new leaves coming out will be this pukey, lighty, limey green. 3, 4, 5 shades lighter green than the mature leaves. Most consultants will say, you know what's coming, need some nitrogen. Need some magnesium. Magnesium as a mineral has to be at the party for the plant to make chlorophyll, i.e. the green color. The quicker that leaf can become a dark green color, the more sun it can absorb and the more sugar it can make, increasing your carbon and oxygen, decreasing the threshold of problems. Create and engineer the environment to grow what you want. Magnesium is a wonderful mineral, but it has to be in check. If you're single digits, please get it up to double digits, and you'll be able to cut down your nitrogen bill that you really didn't need in the first place. Potassium is the number 1 electrolyte mineral, magnesium is number 2. Sulfur or sulfate is the 3rd electrolyte mineral. Sulfur is known just by S. Sulfur is for the soil, but a sulfate is the only form a plant wants. What the heck does that mean? It comes back to this oxygen thing again. Sulfur is an S, sulfate is an SO4. Huh! Simple, easy, breathable oxygen makes everything more available. If you're trying to put sulfur, sulfate, or sulfuric acid to lower the pH of your soil, please stop. It will only drop it for a short period of time and it'll pop back up. I have never seen anyone in almost 40 years fix, balance, and normalize the pH of their soil with sulfur, sulfate, or sulfuric acid. And if anyone here has done it, please raise your hand because I would love to shake your hand and call you sir, because you're the first. You want to stabilize and lower the pH of your high pH soil? Carbon and oxygen. What do I mean by that? Another thing your soil test doesn't show you. Carbon and oxygen exhaled from a microbe is carbon dioxide. Now here comes a little more chemistry. Not tough chemistry, but CO2, and a lot of it exhaled by the microbes, and some water, when they combine, forms carbonic acid that has a pH between 4 and 5. You want to naturally lower and stabilize the pH of your soil? Feed the microbes, let them breathe, give it an irrigation or a shot of rain, and it will start balancing itself on its own. To give exact numbers to that, there's a lot of, got a tickle, sorry. There's a lot of soil in California that we deal with that has pHs in the soil of 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5. And it's a hell on earth. We started opening up the soil with calcium and putting some sugar down. We were able to drop the pH of that soil 1.5 points from a 9.5 down to an 8 in 1 year. It's like, yeah, big deal, that's 1.5 points. Every 1/10 of a point would be like us running a marathon, 26 miles. It's a logarithmic movement. 1/10 of a point is a huge journey. If you let Mother Nature take care of it on its own, you won't see any yield drag. You won't see any bad side effects. You'll just see wonderful things happening. But sulfur or sulfate is not the mineral that's going to balance, change, or lower the pH of your soil. Anybody that drove a vehicle here probably has a battery in it. I can't see that, Lauren. Good to see you too, man. I'm guessing that's 5. Okay. Every vehicle has sulfuric acid in the battery, unless you got a lithium. But the 12-volt batteries are sulfuric acid, SO4. There's that chemistry again. Why is this important? The sulfuric acid in a 12-volt battery is needed to stabilize the electricity that the generator or the alternator created. Where am I going with this? Remember a little bit earlier today, every microbe or almost every aerobic soil microbe carries a half of a volt of electricity in its body. And if you're checking the ECs on your soil and they're low, look to see what your sulfur or sulfate numbers are. They should be 30 to 40 parts per million. You'll be okay all the way down to 15, 18 parts per million. If you get down below that, you're going to run into some problems. On your soil test, it should give two different nitrogens. It should give nitrate nitrogen, NO3, and it should give ammoniacal or ammoniated nitrogen, NH4. Why am I giving more chemistry? Because atmospheric air is like two balloons, a nitrogen and a nitrogen. It's not available to the plant. If that goes into the soil and the microbes pop them, they may take a nitrogen and it's like, oh, what are we doing? We're going to grow some roots, some stem, and some leaf. Let's throw 3 oxygen on that nitrogen and make a nitrate and start growing some plant. Or if that air goes into the soil, and if your pH is below 7 and you have some hydrogen on the base saturation, the microbes say, oh, we're going into reproduction. We need ammoniacal nitrogen. We need NH4. We'll take this one nitrate and hook it to 4 hydrogen, and now we got some reproductive energy. If your nitrate nitrogen and ammoniated nitrogen are listed on your soil test, please look at them. They should both balance out at 30 to 40 parts per million. Most times they won't. You'll have higher nitrate and lower ammoniated. That could be for several reasons. 1, do you have any hydrogen on the clay particle? 2, is there even any air in the soil? 3, is there any carbon in the soil? You see how this all goes back to the same loop? The calcium and the phosphorus allow the plant to make sugar. The plant makes the sugar to feed the microbes, to feed the system, to feed your cows, to feed us. Am I out of time, Lauren? You haven't gotten up to move yet. Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, I covered a fair bit of stuff without any sheet. Did it make sense? Did I just move warm air? Is there any comments, questions, or concerns that have arisen? Yes, sir.
Oh, I can go there.
Oh, this is more intimate.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not that we're looking for that.
Thanks, Glen, for all this explanation. My question is, you were touching the subject of the cutting height. You know, I'm doing cover crops, and sometimes I harvest them in the fall when they're frozen. Can you just re-explain how this works, or what should I retain there? Also, when I'm doing for our dairy haylage and so on, what's the impact of taking these 3 or 4 cuts out of the soil? Do I destroy the structure kind of away, the root system, and so on?
I'm not sure which way to come at that. Cover crops. Turning them back, is that what?
Yeah, taking it off.
Okay, removal of a cover crop. A cover crop is not removed. That's why they call it cover. It's now a cash crop. If you pull the residue off the top, you're going to get a little bit of sugar, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen in the roots, but you're pulling a lot of it off. You may need it for feed, I get that, but don't expect a cover crop to be the Hail Mary hand of God healing if you're pulling it off and feeding it. Depending on how much you leave, if you can leave some vegetative growth and let it grow back and then turn it in, it's more benefit. The other thing, if you're growing a cover crop, please don't chem kill it with a herbicide, because if you listen to glyphosate or Roundup with the commercials for the resident or the homeowners, glyphosate kills the root too. It goes into the system. And I hate to be anything but honest, but it poisons the whole plant, including the root. Nothing wants to eat that. It's a turd in the punch bowl. The microbes are like, we're better than that. We deserve more than this. They're feeding us crap. We're not eating it because they know they will die, because Roundup is a registered patented herbicide that's also a registered patented antimicrobial, i.e. antibiotic. Why would a company patent a herbicide as an antibiotic? Because when they sterilize your soil, you don't get to sue them because they have a patent. I'm going to end right there.